Good morning, everyone. And this lesson is a little bit different than my typical application tutorials because it's on photographic concepts. So, photographic concepts today I've broken down into essentially four different areas, and I call them the four C's. Now, to describe these, I'll show you some photographs. Now, the first one is clarity. So, clarity is just talking about is the picture in focus, okay? The second C is contrast. Contrast is in the photograph, do you see a black point, like up here, or actually here, the shadow, and a white point, something that is pure white. Now, in this photograph, it's actually hard to see a pure white. Maybe somewhere along these grasses, you might find a pure white. And then how many shades do you have in between? Good contrast and good what's called high dynamic range will have as many different shades as possible to give you good contrast. Okay? The third C is color. And color is whether the color is vibrant and rich and it bleeds over into the concepts of contrast and things like this. So this photograph has lots of color, but may not be as vibrant as you like. Okay, and I can show you more examples of that later when we talk about color. And then the last concept that's a C, which is actually the largest area in which most people deal with, is composition. And there are many, many, many rules around composition. This is called the golden rule when you're looking at this in terms of composition, which is actually probably the more difficult concept with composition. But what we're going to start with today is clarity. So clarity, if we look at that, a photograph, it's basically, is the photograph in sharp focus, like this photograph here? Now, how do we determine whether a photograph is clear? When you're starting, it's very difficult. Some photographs may look clear, but you don't really know unless you zoom in. Now, this is one of the easier ones to deal with, and this is what we're going to start with when you do your photography. You notice that it is very sharp. And the reason why is because you can see, because of the reflected wet surfaces of this person's face, and especially in the eye, because it is a highly reflective surface, you can see the sharp lines that determine what clarity actually is. So this is a very clear shot. Okay? If we look at another shot here, and we take a look at the eyes here, okay, it's that reflective surface in the eyes that really show you how sharp a photograph is. And that's actually going to be the exercise today, to actually shoot a very sharp photograph of literally just the eye. Okay. Now, one of the other things that can really help determine focus is if it's got what's called a shallow depth of field. So if you shoot very close to an object, like this here, you have what's called a shallow depth of field, which means you can see that this is in focus, and say this reflective surface down here, we have it in focus, but then we've got all this other stuff that's out of focus. That's a shallow depth of field. Only a small portion of the image is actually in focus. And because of the contrast between, not contrast in color, but contrast between sharp focus and in focus is there, it actually highlights the clarity of the photograph. And just one more example of that here. And you can see this object is in very sharp focus, shallow depth of field, and this, the background, is out of focus. So with that, you end up with this looking even more clear because of the blurry background. Anyway, I hope that gives you a good understanding of what clarity is, and now you can go out and shoot and try and get super sharp shots.